My talk today is about cultivating an Ember application, and this is my first time using Figma slides, so if anything goes wrong, we can blame Figma and not me. Okay, so the main question I'm hoping to answer is how do you cultivate an Ember application? And when the word cultivate means to foster the growth of something or to improve something by labor or care or study. Um, and so after, we have all these nice blueprints which get you a really great starting point for Glimmer or template components or version 5 of Ember or TypeScript or any number of things. And they're really good to help you get started. But they don't necessarily help as much over time. And so as you upgrade versions, blueprints can provide a nice template, but um, upgrading your entire app that you've worked on for years doesn't really work as well. And one option is to, of course, never update, and you would be stuck on, I don't know, say Ember 2.4 or something. And that would probably work in perpetuity, but then you would lose out on all the new features. So as long as you had a package log file and NPM doesn't go down or anything like that, then you could continue developing an app for a long time. But that's not really fun or interesting and not something that probably any of us want to do. So before we start, I want to give a brief overview of why I think I'm even remotely qualified to give any of this advice, starting a little bit about me. So I've been a front-end dev for a little over 10 years now. I've started in Backbone.js or jQuery, then Angular, then React, and a little bit of Vue. And lately at my current role, we've been working almost entirely in Ember. I work at a company called Customer.io, which does messaging to customers using email, in-app notifications, etc. And I've personally been using Ember since 2019 when I joined Customer.io. So almost 5 years ago now. So digging in a little bit to Customer.io, which is the basis of this talk, is like I mentioned, it's broadly a customer engagement platform. We have 265 employees in 35 countries, so we're 100% remote, which has its own interesting aspects of cultivating an Ember application. In some ways, it makes it easier. In some ways, it makes it a little bit harder. We have over 7,600 customers. So this isn't really, these aren't really bragging points. It's more to provide a sense of scale and that we don't have an Ember application that's used by 3 users daily. It's something that's used by lots of people in lots of countries every day. And we've sent over 35 billion messages in 2023. So text messages, emails, in-app notifications, etc. And as far as I know, customer satisfaction, so the people using our Ember application every day, it's relatively really high at 99%. So our Ember application serves a lot of people. It works really well, and we continue to add new features all the time. And so digging a little bit further and talking about our Ember application, the first commit was in July 2013. This was way back with Bower. I don't even think Ember CLI was around back then. And we've essentially been using the same code base since then. And a little bit of history, we upgraded to version 2 in 2016, and then V3 in 2018, and then recently last year, finally to version 4. And we're working on version 5. Hopefully, we'll get to that this year as well. And some interesting trivia, I suppose, is that at some point we added CoffeeScript to the entire code base in 2013, and then 2 years later decided that was a bad idea and ripped it all out. And then in 2019, we had our first TypeScript commit to add the tsconfig file. As of last week, we have 1,586 components that are built with Ember. and 76% of them are using TypeScript, and 91% of our components are importing the component class from Glimmer rather than the Ember component. So at this point, we've almost got all of our components using Glimmer, which is really cool to see, and I actually didn't realize it was that high. And then to build our entire application, we maintain 4 private add-ons separately. So this talk is kind of split into 2 categories of advice that I want to go over. And the first part is things that we keep in mind day to day when maintaining our code base or writing new features, fixing bugs, etc., or even reviewing pull requests. And then there are more practical things to actually do an upgrade or maintain and update our actual application. So to start, we'll do with the kind of things that we all keep in the back of our heads when either writing code or reviewing code. And the entire thing that makes this all possible is the hard work that the Ember core team and all the contributors have done to make backwards compatibility a focus of all the versions. And so without this intense focus on backwards compatibility, this talk and really the ability to upgrade fairly easily would be much more difficult, if not impossible. So, to dip our toes in, the first thing is to use or practice incremental adoption. And this applies not only to new Ember features, but also to add-ons, changes of languages, and more. So within our Ember application, we have a mixture of pods layout, classic components, Glimmer components, Glint components, or template components. We have TypeScript, we have JavaScript, we have Sass, we have Tailwind, and there's some other technologies. And that probably sounds like a total mess to you. But actually for us, it works out fairly well. And while we have a bunch of different technologies, um, there you find ways to split them up or to um, use a code mod, for example, to make changes to large areas of the application. And the parts that you don't want to use anymore, over time, they get smaller and smaller. And with our 10-year-old app, we have, it's kind of a fact of life when you have such a long-running app that there will be parts that are very old but still work. And generally, that's okay if you take the approach of if it's not broke, don't fix it. And the strategy that we've taken is if you are working on an outdated component, then it's a really great opportunity to convert it to Glimmer or a template component or TypeScript or whatever new technology we've adopted. The other big thing we try to do now is use the platform. So we will always prefer native HTML, CSS, and either adopted or late stage JS features. A lot of our old Ember code relied on prototype overrides and non-standard JavaScript methods, which I'm sure were very helpful back in the day, but with the flexibility of JavaScript now, they're not really needed and they're all deprecated now. And so we've been slowly transitioning into native methods and using the platform wherever we can. And this also helps, if for whatever reason you need to choose a different framework or a different technology, then it makes it much simpler to transition to something else rather than having to rewrite a lot of custom framework code. The other thing is prefer boring technology. And I think that this is something that's becoming more and more popular, but it's worth repeating if you're looking to maintain an application over a long time. You want to choose something that's a little bit more stable. It's possibly a little bit older, but stability really matters when maintaining an application over the long term. If you have some shiny new technology or there's a really cool new add-on that hasn't really been tested yet, then it may become abandoned or it may have a really big API change that you need to spend a lot of time working on. And so when you have a goal of using something for a long time, it's better to choose boring technology, and you might not hire it might not be cool, so you might not hire as many people as you want to who want to work on the bleeding edge and use all this cool new technology. But we found that it has helped us to avoid burnout and pages when you're on call. So it's better to let the dust settle on technology. And the other thing we want to try and do, and we're not always successful at this, is to try and update as soon as possible. So when new Ember versions come out, we try to keep up to date with those as much as possible. We leverage our test suite to find breakages and try and keep up with minor and major versions when we can. And at a minimum, when a new version comes out, we take a look at the release notes and start planning for what we would need to do to make an update if it's going to be a big one. The other one that seems pretty self-explanatory is to avoid private APIs. This is not as much of a problem recently with Embroider and Octane. I think there's been a lot of progress made to try and avoid having people use private APIs, but they're private for a reason, and eventually something will break, and then you'll be stuck either being unable to implement something that you had previously or trying to find a new add-on or something else. Okay, so this one is probably going to be a bit controversial, but you should be wary, and maybe wary is the wrong word, of installing new add-ons. Um, when you add a new add-on, it comes with trade-offs, of course. So you get a lot of convenience because the work has already been done. They might have a really nice test suite and maybe a bunch of people using it. But in exchange, you are allocating time in the future to maintain updates. And potentially, if it gets abandoned, you have to either fork it or find something else or take it on yourself. So this kind of goes back to using boring technology where you want to kind of wait until something's really established or has been tested and used a lot. You also want to kind of judge whether the third-party maintainer will be able to actually maintain it long term, or if this is probably going to be something that they just threw up and probably won't actually maintain going forward. Which is pulling, if you have an MIT license, then you have no warranty, right? So if someone throws up some code, then if you want to use it, that's fine. But the maintainers have no, they aren't required to actually maintain it in a lot of cases. And so you might find yourself having to fork it or trying to migrate to something else. And if an add-on is really simple, you might consider taking on their work yourself. Or if you only need one very small slice of an add-on's functionality, maybe you can just do that in-house, I suppose, and write your own components or your own utilities rather than importing this new add-on that you have to have this trade-off with, convenience and future time spent on it. And another really important one is to build out your test suite. And this is not to say that you need 100% coverage, because I personally, and we at Customer.io don't find that to be a useful metric, but you really want to have an exhaustive suite of particularly integration and acceptance tests to help with framework or add-on updates. In this case, unit tests aren't really helpful because they're not testing things end to end. But if you were to, there have been several times when we upgrade Ember to either a new minor or a new version, and our test suite will catch a bunch of things that we need to either go fix or some bugs that we have to file or watch if it's already been filed. And generally, with every pull request we have, we try to make sure that some tests are added. And of course, it's not 100% coverage, but especially with bugs, to make sure that the bug doesn't happen again. So that's kind of the things that we try to keep in mind day to day when working on our Ember application. And so now I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the strategies that we use to actually go ahead and make updates and start updating things from version 2 to version 3 to version 4, or updating add-ons or turning on Embroider, because each thing especially with Embroider or a major Ember update, it may not be super simple, or there may be a lot of deprecations. So speaking of deprecations, you want to gather new deprecations as early as possible and document them and potentially find ways to note them in your code base. So there are ESLint plugins or tools that will throw errors when it runs into a new deprecation in development. And for us, deprecations have ended up being one of the most time-consuming portions of updates because they tend to be in a lot of places. And thankfully, Ember adds these deprecation notices very early and well ahead of a major update, which means that you can remove them over months rather than a days when you need to do the update. So for this, you want to read the changelog for new versions and note any new deprecations. Sometimes you can get lucky and you can do a find and replace or use a code mod to fix a deprecation. The one that comes to mind recently is a change from the name inject to service for importing the service decorator. So that could be done with a code mod or a general find and replace, which is really nice because that makes it really easy to take care of. And then there are tools like Ember CLI deprecation workflow, and like I said, a few ESLint plugins that can allow you to tackle these as you work on components or as you get a couple hours or a couple days to try and tackle one deprecation or a set of deprecations. The other thing that you want to do is before you actually start working on the update, you want to have a good idea of what actually will need to be done. So for us, we take care of this in Notion, which we have a lot of our documentation in, but you could do it in GitHub, in Jira, Linear, whatever place that your team as a whole collectively has documentation. And for us, this is basically just a checklist with maybe links to pull requests or links to issues that we want to refer to. And then we can check it off as we go. And what's really important here is that each step is broken down into small, very attainable chunks. So you want to avoid having one single thing on your to-do list that is update Ember to version 5, because that's too broad and it will take too much time. So instead, you would want to break that down into, and this requires a little bit of research, and you will also have to add things to this list as you get into the upgrade process. But things like tackle this deprecation or upgrade Ember data first to version 5 or update these specific add-ons because they're incompatible with version 5 at the version that we're using. And so you essentially want to have these as small as possible. So not only that they're well documented, but also if you have multiple people on your front-end team, you can do this asynchronously. And so one developer can tackle a deprecation, one developer can update the add-on, so on and so forth. The other thing that we also try to do, because it's a major pain, is to avoid having to do the entire update all at once. And this is kind of going back to things that I've talked about before, but once you have this list of all the things that you need to do in order to make the update, you ideally want to do that over time rather than spending, in our case, for version 4, we talked to management and we got buy-in to do upgrade to version 4 kind of at once, and that took several weeks. And so it can take a really long time to tackle, updating all of your add-ons, fixing all the deprecations, fixing any bugs that pop up. And so this, if you try to do everything at once, that means you're not shipping new features or bug fixes to your users. And it also is easier to update things as you go in small steps in case they break something on production. You don't have to roll the entire thing back. You can just roll one small portion of it back. It's also is really just a big headache saver because instead of spending 4 weeks banging your head against the desk trying to figure out why something is broken, you can spend only a few hours doing that, or you can put it aside and come back to it later when maybe you have a different perspective or maybe something else was put into place. And the other really important thing is to work with your leaders in your company or management to try and get resources. And so with the previous things that I just talked about, if you do all those things, you not only have a very detailed list that ideally matches the way that you have your product or company development roadmap, but you also have the ability to estimate each set of work if that's something that's useful to your company. And so with individual little chunks, you can say, this will take a few hours to tackle this deprecation, or this will take a few days to update this add-on. And so this helps them plan and get an understanding of how long this is going to take. And part of this is also documenting why you should update. And so, like I mentioned a long time ago, staying on Ember 2 or Ember 3 or Ember 4 for a functioning app that has users and works well, it will probably continue to work in the medium to long-term future. But your devs are going to be frustrated by the limitations in framework APIs. A lot of add-ons don't work with old versions of Ember anymore. Trying to get help in Discord or GitHub for older versions is going to be a lot harder. And also, you won't have access to new features like Glimmer or template components or Vite or anything else that comes up, Polaris coming up soon. And so that both is kind of it's demotivating to work on an old application, I think, as we probably all know, but it can also be very frustrating. And for performance, newer versions of Ember are getting more performant all the time. And so your users are also missing out on, more performant pages, more performant updates, etc. So working to document all the things that need to be done, adding estimates if you need them, and also documenting the importance or why this should be done helps to get buy-in from your leaders and your product management and your CTO so that they can start slotting in the work to do this either all at once, in our case with version 4, or to split that into work for your development teams. And finally, the last thing that's really helpful for us has been to reach out in Discord. And so the Ember Discord is a really great resource for getting help from people who work on Ember all the time as the core team, or really heavy contributors, or just working with other members who are having the same issues or have solved the same issues. And so as always, with something like this, you want to start with search, and then if you can't find anything, then finding the proper channel and writing detail with examples or a demo app, replication steps, screenshots, anything really helps. And we found that it's been very helpful. People are super friendly, super eager to help. And so it's really been invaluable to us. So really quickly, in summary, try to avoid sweeping changes, be wary of new and experimental tech. Not to say that you shouldn't adopt it, but really consider the trade-offs that you're making. Write tests, break up and plan your updates, and try and get buy-in from management, because that will make it easier to actually get the time to spend on making these updates. So that's it. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Really good talk. In particular, I like the point about breaking things down and planning properly. We talk to a lot of teams that to fail to see how valuable that is, and then they don't do it, and then they suffer from it.
Yeah, definitely. I think,
Uh,
yeah. It's the reason
yeah,
why if you work on feature development, you break things down into tasks that you can work on. It's easier to keep track of. You can ship things faster, and it helps people work on it, asynchronously, and rather than having to
yeah,
spend 3 weeks on one single issue. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Any questions? again in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask directly. There's a slightly biased question from Chris. Does Lint to the future have a place in your workflow?
I don't think so.
Oh,
I will
no.
have to research that. Yeah.
I have a question as well. In the beginning, you said 265 employees, if I remember correctly. Can you share how many engineers work on the Ember?
Yeah,
Or
so
I guess that's not all 265.
no, definitely not. So that 265 is split between developers, QA engineers, product managers, designers, salespeople. So it's the entire company. And so the engineering team is a smaller portion of that. I want to say it's probably around 50 people. And then the number of people that are dedicated to writing Ember code is probably 10 to 12 people. So it's a really relatively small chunk. And so it's pretty cool that with the limited number of people, we've been able to, we have strict mode, strict components, strict helpers, all that stuff turned on for embroider. We're still at Webpack. Hopefully we can update the Vite, but we have a fairly modern code base, which is really cool.
Great, great. And I guess you also don't need any mechanisms like engines or so to separate of the app into separate chunks and then have separate teams and so.
Yeah, we've thought about it. Right now, our Ember application is a monolith. So it's one single application with a couple of add-ons that we've built. We've talked about how we could maybe split that up, but I think it's easier for us at this point to keep it as a monorepo and kind of a monolith application, given how many things, there's a lot of cross-component usage. And so splitting that up cleanly would be
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a price to pay for using something like engines and so on. Like with a 10 people team or so, it doesn't seem like that would be worth it, maybe, right?
Yep, exactly.
We have another, I guess, also slightly biased question from Alex. Will you try the code mod?
I am actually very interested in it. So I'm currently on a sabbatical that will end at the end of this month. So maybe the first thing that I'll try when I go back in September is to just try this code mod and see what happens. And if it works, then that'll be great. We have a lot of TypeScript files, so it will be a uh, good way to find out how much work would need to be done or how many bugs there are, which, yeah, only one way to find out.